Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Learn Live session at Ignite 2023, where we're going to go through the Build an AI-enabled chat with Azure OpenAI and Azure Cosmos DB Learn module in the next 60 minutes. But before we get into this, Bethany, I really enjoyed listening to Satya's keynote today. So I'm curious, how is your experience so far at Ignite? And do you have any key takeaways from the announcements that have been shared?
Yeah, I enjoyed Satya's keynote today, and I was pleased to see NVIDIA's CEO join for the session. I think my key takeaway was model as a service. I'm curious to use Llama and see how I can be able to play around with it. I've only used Azure OpenAI and OpenAI services, so I'm curious how the other models work and how I can be able to play around with them. So yeah. What about you, 𝗬𝗲? Any takeaways from today's session?
Yeah, sounds good. Where to start? Today's been really exciting, and I know this will sound cliche, but for me, just the phrase "we are in the age of Copilot" kind of made me take a reflection moment and try to understand and resonate with the different customers who are sharing their different experiences of how Copilot was changing their day-to-day activities. So for that reflection moment for me was really key. And of course, without what we'll definitely mention is the announcement of the Copilot Studio. And I can't wait to see what developers do by building their plugins and building amazing GPTs. So I know enough of that. Let's get straight into our Learn module. I know we have a lot to share, but first we can start with some introductions.
Yeah, I'm Bethany 𝗬𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. I work here at Microsoft as a cloud advocate, focused specifically on Core AI. And on the web, you can find me anywhere using @BethanyJep. And I don't know, what about you, Julia?
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Julia. I also work alongside Bethany as a cloud advocate here at Microsoft. We focus on our different developer communities, JavaScript, Java, .NET communities, to ensure that we can help you get onboarded to our different developer tools and Azure cloud services. So you can also find me online at Julia Muiruri. And yeah, definitely happy to connect and chat more.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yes, and this session is live, so we are not alone in this session. We have a wonderful set of moderators. We have Jay, Konstantin, Mandela, DMITRII, and Julian, who are experts in this field. So they'll be here with us answering any questions you have on the chat. So remember, the session is live and we want it to be as interactive as possible. So in case you have any questions, you can ask them on the chat. And of course, you can also try out whatever we are doing and see if it works from your end. Yeah.
Great. So I know you're all curious to learn what we have in store today. So for the next 50 or so minutes, we are going to go through a guided project. So this is a kind of a special Learn module type that sits on learn.microsoft.com. So in this guided project, we are actually going to go through an end-to-end project on how you can build a Blazor application, which is a chatbot that connects to both Azure OpenAI and Azure Cosmos DB. Now, I know I have mentioned that this is live, so if you want to follow along with the content that we'll be sharing, definitely go to the link that is being displayed on your screen. That is aka.ms/learnlive- the code on your screen. Or alternatively, you can just scan the QR code presented at the bottom left of this screen. And alternatively, we'll also have our nice moderators just drop the link to this module on the chat. I know I've just given a high-level mention of what we're going to cover. So Bethany, would you want to break it down in terms of exactly what we're going to do throughout this presentation?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So we have 4 main key objectives. And the objectives, I think I'll combine them. So first of all, we'll go into deploying our services, that is the Azure OpenAI service, as well as the Azure Cosmos DB service. And then from there, after we connect the 2 services, we'll use them in our application. So for example, we'll be able to send prompts to a model that is deployed and pass the responses using the Azure OpenAI service. And the other thing is being able to query update and delete items in our NoSQL container. So I'm not sure how exactly we're going to be able to achieve this, because I think these are a lot of things that we're going to do. So Julia, do you have an idea of like what we're going to work around?
Yeah, for sure, I do have one. So I'll actually give you a scenario that we can use to kind of try and relate with the problem that we have ahead of us and what we'll try and solve for the remaining part of this presentation. So imagine yourself in a development team, and for the last couple of weeks, you've been working on an ASP.NET Core Blazor application, which is a chatbot interface. And on this application, users are able to go in there, type in questions, and get a response back from the app. Now, this application is able to store the different messages that you send. And imagine a scenario where you're on the app, you're chatting with your best friend, and then you talk about one topic, get bored, then you start a new session and talk about a different topic. So this app kind of helps save all these records in our database. But the beauty is that we're not going to use the traditional bot framework for this, but rather we're going to connect to an Azure OpenAI model that will be giving us the real-time responses. So that's a high-level example of scenario that we'll be covering. And I'm curious, Bethany, what do we need to prepare for this presentation? Are there any prerequisites that we need to worry about for this?
Yeah, of course, as with any project, you need to have the tools of trade. So in this session, we have the project overview, whereby we'll be covering different steps to be able to achieve our objectives. So for example, the first thing we're going to do is to deploy the services, that is the Azure Cosmos DB, as well as the Azure OpenAI services. And I'm not really sure how we're going to go about this. Julia, do you have an idea of that?
Well, yeah, I can probably think of two ways we can do this. One, we can go on the Azure portal and create our different resources that we're going to use for this project. Or alternatively, and this is the route we're going to go with, we can use a bicep template, which is basically a file that uses the declarative language to kind of define the different resources that would be required for our project. This way, instead of creating these individual resources on the portal, we'll basically deploy everything in one click. And I'm super excited to share that during the demo session.
Yeah, I'm impressed by the one-click deployment. So I'm also wondering, because the next step is we're supposed to get the credentials for the services that we deployed. Is it also one click, and which service are we going to use?
Well, yeah, so we'll actually do the same thing. So we're going to use the Azure CLI tool. So if you've not heard of it, this is the Azure command line tool that you get to download and install on your PC, and you're able to manage your different Azure resources. So that's the first tool that we'll actually propose for you to download and install if you're following along in this demo. And our moderators will share a link for you to do this. So on this tool, we'll definitely use it to get our credentials that we're going to add to our app and connect to these services. Again, more of that to come soon once we get into our demo session.
It keeps getting exciting because you're talking about just one click to be able to deploy our resources, and then one click to be able to get our credentials. So I'm also wondering, since we are building on top of a project, this means we'll be having a starter solution whereby we can be able to now code along and add our methods and the different, probably the connections and so on. Will we still need to install a lot of things, or will it be as simple as just the one click?
Well, that's a really good question, and I have good news for you. So today, as you mentioned, we do have our starter code that is ready for us to get in there and start working on. And the beauty of this is that we're going to run this application without getting to configure a local developer environment. That's right, we're going to use a GitHub Codespace, which is an existing pre-configured virtual developer environment that will allow us to save on time that we would otherwise spend configuring this environment, ensuring that we have the right runtimes, tools, languages installed, so that we can easily spin up this environment from any device, anywhere, and get started into our code. So again, we'll show that in detail once we get to the demo session.
Yeah, and I think once we've been able to deploy resources, and have our code running on GitHub code spaces, I think it's now easier for us to now write the code whereby we'll implement the Azure Cosmos DB now as our storage service, and then also implement the Azure OpenAI as our conversational interface. Then I think from there, we'll now check and see, does our application actually work? Have we been able to meet our goals? And yeah, I think that's it, right?
Well, I'm literally itching to get our hands dirty and have a look at the code. So is there anything else that we need to set up for this project, or can we just switch to our browser and get coding?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a lot about Azure, and we haven't actually covered how you can get access to Azure as well as Azure OpenAI. So first of all, for you to get access to Azure, we have a free Azure subscription that you can get started with. So you can head over to the link that will be shared on the chat, and you can be able to share with them. And then the other thing is you need to have access to the Azure OpenAI service. You'll also share a link on the chat, and you can be able to go there, sign up for access to Azure OpenAI service. And I think, yeah, we'll be up and running within no time.
All right, exciting. So I think we can get straight into how we kind of make this happen. So the first thing we did mention that we're going to need several Azure resources. So we're going to need an Azure OpenAI resource. We're going to need a Cosmos DB resource. So for that, as I mentioned, we're going to use the Azure CLI tool, which at this point, I believe you have downloaded it and installed it on your PC. So if this is your first time using it, you might want to do a quick AZ login just to connect to your Azure account. You'll give it your credentials, and you'll be able to access your Azure subscription. And so what we're going to do first is declare a shell variable called the resource group name and pass in the name of the resource group that we want to create in our account. So treat a resource group as a folder that will store related resources and related files to a certain project. And so that's the first step that we're going to take. We're going to declare the variable and pass in the name of this resource group, which will be mslan Cosmos OpenAI. After that, we're going to use the AZ group create command to create this resource group. And at this point, it's going to be empty. So you'll just type AZ group create, and we'll pass into parameters. We'll pass in the name, which is what we have just assigned to our variable. And we'll also pass in the location parameter, which is east to west in this case. It is recommended for you to use and select a region that is closest to your users to ensure that your services are super fast and you don't have any latency issues. Once you do that, you are going to see such a response where it will tell you whether the resource group has been created successfully. If not, you'll definitely get a message. And then the next thing, remember at this point, our resource group is empty. We mentioned that we're going to deploy all the required resources in one click. So we're going to use the AZ deployment group create command. And for that, we're going to pass 3 parameters. The first one is the resource group that we have just created. We need to let the tool know where exactly it will create our resources. And then we'll need to pass in the name, which is the deployment name that we will give it, which in this case is zero touch deployment. And then lastly, we'll pass in a URL to where our bicep template is stored. So remember I mentioned that this is a file that defines the different resources we are going to deploy. So Bethany, I'm pretty sure that our viewers today want to have a feel of how this file looks like. So can you quickly show us and kind of show us exactly how we can also find it?
Yeah, so we'll need to head over to our GitHub starter application. So the first step is going to GitHub. And this is the starter application that we're using today. It's in Azure samples, the Cosmos DB -ChatGPT repository. And you'll scroll down to our Azure deploy template. So Azure deploy.json template. And from there, you'll be able to find the different variables and how we are gonna be able to create them. So for example, the first thing we have is the location parameter. And in the location parameter, we specify that we are deploying our resources to east to west, but in case there's other locations available, we can still use that location, right? And then the other thing is our resource group. our unique resources ID. So for example, we want all the resources to have a unique ID. So we create a unique string based on the resource group and give each resource a unique ID. Then the next thing is to define the billing for our resources. So we're creating 3 resources. The first one is the Cosmos DB resource. And for Cosmos DB, we'll be using the free tier, whereby if you already have a free tier, it will bring you an error in case you've already deployed a free tier. But then if you do not have one, we'll create a free tier resource. And then for the OpenAI service, we'll have the S0 billing category. And then the other thing is now giving a breakdown of like the different resources. For example, for OpenAI, we're using OpenAI 3.5 Turbo, and that's the model we're using. And then the model name is the chat model, because we are communicating in terms of a chat model, in terms of we're asking the AI a question and it's giving back an answer. And then for Cosmos DB, we also have the different settings that we're giving it. For example, we have the database name, that's the chat database, and so on and so forth. Then the last thing is we're also creating a third resource, that's the web apps. The web apps is now whereby we'll be deploying our resources and being able to share it to the world. Yeah, I think that's it. And then from there, once we are able to create our template, we have to wait about 5 to 10 minutes to see if it's deployed. To see the deployments, we'll have to go back to Azure. So you can either check the deployments right on the Azure CLI, but I prefer a visual way of saying it. So I'll prefer to go back to the Azure portal. And in Azure portal, we'll check our resource groups and see, do we have a resource group called the Azure?
Oh, yeah. I see
the Microsoft LAN, Cosmos DB, OpenAI. Yeah, we have the resource group, and all the resources that we have will be listed there. And then if you scroll up to the overview, you'll be able to see our deployments on the right, that our deployments is succeeded. And from there, you'll also see the template that we used. So in this case, we use the zero-touch deployment tool, whereby that's the template we've used, and we've been able to successfully deploy it. Yeah. So I'm actually wondering, once we've been able to deploy, how exactly does the code look like? Because we've been able to see, we've been able to deploy the Azure resources, but then we have a starter code already there for us. So how exactly does the code look like? Julia, can you be able to show us that?
Yeah, I would gladly do that. And first off, thank you for showing me how I can see and validate that my resources have actually been created. So I was wondering from the CLI tool, after I ran the command, where I can actually go to confirm that my resources have been created. So next up, as you've requested, we're actually going to have a look at our code. And as mentioned, we have a starter template already created for us. So you can actually just visit the link that will be shared on chat again with our awesome moderators. And from this repository, as you can see, it's a public template. So you can always fork this. You can always use this in your own GitHub account and explore the code base. So you will notice that we have 2 branches. We have the main branch and the start branch. So for this guided project, it's important for you to note that you need to be on the start branch. This is the branch that has additional steps and guidance in terms of how you can learn and get started with this project. And then I mentioned that we won't have to set up any local developer configuration for our environment. And so for us to run this application, we are actually going to do this in a code space, which, as you can see, is your workspace on the cloud. And in this case, we don't have to worry about the time that it takes to install the right version of a certain programming language and just set up a developer environment that will work for everyone. So in this case, because this takes a couple of seconds, I already created one. So I'm going to show you exactly what you're going to see once you open this in a code space. So you would ideally come to the code space option here, and then just create a new code space on the start branch. It's very important for you to ensure that you are on the start branch. Then once you do that and give it a few seconds to finish configuring, you will get such a layout of our code. And you will see that we have the dev container directory at the very top. So this is what contains the configuration of the container that is being created for us to be able to access this virtual developer environment. As you can see, we are passing in a path to our Docker file, which specifies the image that is being used to deploy this container. We are also passing in some configurations for our ports. How are we going to handle our ports? We're also passing in the features that we need to run in this environment that we'll work with. And you even have the option to customize and create this environment to be as you would like it to be, and just easily get started with writing your code. As we mentioned at the beginning, this is a .NET 8 application. So if you all watched .NET conference yesterday, you actually saw the buzz and the excitement around the new .NET that has been announced. And so we're actually going to quickly validate that that is what has been installed in our environment by running a quick .NET list SDKs. Oops. And just to mention, if you have any questions, please drop them on the chat and our awesome moderators will get to those. So as you can see, we have confirmed that we have .NET running in our environment, and this is still a pre-release version. So you may encounter some errors and some bugs, so kindly just do report them and also help fix this. So that is kind of expected. So the next thing, we won't spend so much time there. You might want to spend some time and understand how this code is structured. How does this code actually work? So the awesome authors of this module actually created a code tour for us. So I would actually invite you to spend a few extra minutes, could be during this presentation or afterwards, where you can just play this code tour and you'll get a detailed explanation of the main components of our solution, including a step-by-step explanation of what each piece of code is doing. And I think this was really thoughtful from the authors. So you can see, in case this is your first time interacting with C# code, you can definitely have a guided tour and explanation of what this project is all about. Now, in the interest of time, we won't go through this entire code tour, but as you can see, it has a proper breakdown of the different components that we're going to be using. But in this case, I'm just going to briefly just mention the key parts that we're going to focus on. And we'll just focus first on the models folder, where we have our two classes, the message and the session. Remember, this is a chat application that we are building, so we definitely need to store our messages and our sessions. So we'll see we have a public record here called message. And if we just scroll down to our constructor, you'll see that we are setting some properties. Of course, since our data is going to our Azure Cosmos database, we need to uniquely identify our messages. And so we are going to pass in the ID property, and we're going to assign a unique value to that. We're also going to save the type of the message. It can either be a message or a session, right? So we need to also set the type. We're also setting a session ID because messages need to be part of a session. If you're talking about topic A, we have several sessions in topic A, topic B, and so forth. Then we're also saving our sender. So we're going to set our sender. Are you the sender is the user of the app, or is the AI assistant the sender? And then we're going to save the timestamp and the text that you're going to pass into the app or get from the AI model. So Bethany, I'm seeing something that is quite not straightforward. So could you please help me understand what a token is?
Yeah, quite interesting. A token is the basic unit in which the basic unit of text which can be processed by the model. This means, for example, if you have a sentence or a phrase of words, how does the model split the text to be able to now understand it? So, for example, if I have the word don't, it has DON, which is a word in itself. Then it has the character apostrophe and then T at the end. So the model will split that into 3 tokens. But then if I have the words, what is OpenAI? That is, what is OpenAI? That's 4 sentences. Probably I'll have question mark at the end. Those are 5 tokens. Yeah, that's basically what tokens are in this scenario.
All right. So if I got it right, it's basically that chunk of separation between the words and characters that the model will actually take in as part of our prompt. So is that a proper understanding?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think that's what we're setting in this first class, and the session class is a lot similar to that. Only in this case, we have some additional methods here. One that will add messages to a message list that we are defining up here in our constructor. And then we have the second method that will basically be updating a message. So that's basically it about the models. I know we'll focus more on the services that we have, and we'll be implementing 2 services today, the Azure OpenAI service, as well as the Cosmos DB service. So at this point, if we were to run our application, and we'll definitely use hot reload. Let's see how fast this is. I saw and heard in the conference yesterday, in .NET conference, that this is supposed to have better performance. So let's kind of see how this one works. So we've not done any changes on our code. We've not implemented any service. We simply want to see how our application is supposed to look like. And I see that it's now opening a preview on my browser. And yeah, so this is the application that has been created. We can create a new chat. Right now, since we've not connected to any service, if I said, hey, you'll see that we are just getting a hard-coded response from the assistant. If I ask, how are you? I'll still get the same response. So Bethany, I'm wondering, could you help us implement the first service, which is Azure OpenAI, and at least get some answers and responses from the model?
Yeah, I'll gladly do that. So for this, I have 2 sides of this. So first, I need to connect the Azure OpenAI service to our application. So with this, I'll show you how I can be able to do that and add that to our code. So for example, going back to the code space that Julia was saying, I'll have to add our keys and credentials here. To get our keys and credentials, we can do it in 2 ways. One, we can use the Azure CLI to be able to get it. But then, as I said, I'm a visual person, so I like seeing everything in text and visually. So I'll go back to Azure Portal. And in Azure Portal, I'll go to a resource group that is the MS-LAN Cosmos OpenAI resource group. And in this resource group, I'll get, for example, the OpenAI service. And here I'll be able to go to keys and endpoints. For keys and endpoints, it will give me my keys and my endpoints, and I can copy this and add them to the application. That's one way. And then I can do the same thing for the other service, that is the Azure Cosmos DB. And I'll be able to also get my keys and endpoints using the same way. So I'll come to keys, and I can be able to copy them the same way I'll be copying my OpenAI. So to copy this, I'll actually have to view them, and then have them copied. And the endpoint, of course, it's actually displayed for all to see. So that's where I'm scrolling up. So I'll come to the project and add a new file. So I'll come here and add a new file. And the file name will be app settings.developer.json. And in this file, I'll add our keys and endpoints. So the file is already created. I'll add it in JSON format. Sorry for that. Let me open it again. So I'll add it in JSON format. The first one is OpenAI, the OpenAI service. And so I won't paste the codes here, but I'll show you how you can add them. So for example, the key in here, I'll paste my keys. And then the next thing is the endpoint. So endpoint, and I'll do the same thing, paste my endpoint here. And then do the same thing for Cosmos DB. So come here, write Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB. And have AI do the rest for me. That's GitHub Copilot. Of course, we're not using the database ID and the collection ID, so I'll remove that, and voila. So there's a question about, do I still need my OpenAI credentials? Yes, you still need them, because that's what you'll be using to connect your application to be able to connect your application to OpenAI service. Once that's done, because of time, I won't be able to type all the code by myself. So I'll come back to the application that's already there. And I think the first thing I need to do is to import the packages. So in this case, since I'm using the OpenAI packages, I'll only need to import the OpenAI package. That is the .NET Azure.ai.openai package. And then the version I'll be using is the beta version 8. And once that's imported, I'll come here and use a directive to add Azure and Azure OpenAI to my code. So here we have two strings. The first one is the model name, and then the OpenAI client. And then we also have a read-only string. This is whereby it's only the system that's reading this. The first one is giving the directive that you are an AI assistant, and then the second one is to give it the directive to summarize our prompt. I need to show this in OpenAI for you to be able to understand where this system prompts comes in, right? So I'll go to the Azure OpenAI portal, and I'll go to chat. In the chat, you'll be able to see. Yeah.
Wait a minute, Bethany. How exactly did you get to this Azure OpenAI Studio?
Oh, I think I've gone too fast. So let me go back. I'll go back to our resource group. And under the resource group, I'll go to Azure OpenAI. And in Azure OpenAI, I'll scroll down to explore and deploy, whereby it will direct me to go to the Azure OpenAI Studio. So in this, once I go to Azure OpenAI Studio, I can be able to get access to now the chat interface. And in the chat interface, we have, let me classify this into 3 categories. So the first one is telling the AI system, this is what you're doing. So this is a system prompt. So you are an AI assistant and you help people find information. It's the same way we've used a system prompt here, whereby we're telling it, you're an AI assistant that helps people find information. Please provide concise answers, be polite and professional. And then the second bit is now the chat playground, whereby you can ask questions and get answers. So for example, my first question will be a very simple one. So I'll probably ask AI, what is Blazor? Because that's what we're using, right? And it will give me a response on what Blazor is. And then the third bit is the parameters. So the parameters, you'll see it being implemented when we're calling the method. And this is now, for example, the max response. This is how many response tokens do I want. For this, it's 800. And then the temperature determines how creative the model is. So the higher the temperature, the more creative the model is. The lower the temperature, the more concise the model is, and so on and so forth. So we have to implement this in our application. So let's go back to our code. And before you even go into now the methods, we need to add our keys and endpoints. So the thing is, we are adding a null exception whereby this argument will be able to complain in case it can't see an endpoint and a key. So if we do not add our keys and endpoints, we'll not be able to get access. It will just give us a complaint in the terminal, hey, we have an error, we can't see your keys and endpoints, right? And then this is now we're adding the URI, the endpoint URI, as well as the Azure key credential to be able to access our OpenAI client. And then the third, so now after that, we can now actually access our OpenAI service. And then we have 2 methods. So the first method, first of all, we want to be able to ask our AI the question and it responds that answer. That's the first one. And this is the completions method. And then the second method we are asking is to be able to summarize a prompt. So in this method, we have 2 variables of the type chat message. So we have the user and the system. The the system message, whereby the system is telling you, by the way, I am an AI system, I can be able to do this and this. But this is something that's read-only and won't be available to the user. It's just giving the AI system its role. And then the other thing is now the user, whereby as a user, I'll be able to ask and get the prompt, to ask prompt and get a reply. And then we have our options, the chat completions, our options of chat completions, options type. And here is where now we add our different, what did I call them? Our different parameters. These are the parameters that we're using. So that's what we're adding, as well as the message that the different roles that we have, as well as the parameters. So we're telling them, okay, these are the parameters we have. So since this is now the prompt and we're getting a reply, we're using 4,000 as the maximum tokens. And then we have the session ID, which will now determine who the user is. And then we have the messages, right? After that, we now have an asynchronous request that will come in and complete our chat for us. And it will return to us the message. How this looks like, let me go back to our playground and show you the code. So I'll view this in JSON. And you can be able to see we have the messages and we have the two roles, the system as well as the user role. And each role gives a message. So what we want the AI to return, or what we want our method to return, is this message, right? So now that's what we're doing in our application. We also do the same thing for summary. And then once we're done with that, we come back to our terminal and run, as Julia said, we're running the .NET application, hot reload. And let's see. Taking a minute. Let's give it a second.
So at this point, it's supposed to actually get me a response from the model and not just give me the hard-coded response that it did before.
Yes, yes.
Gotcha.
You can actually be able to see the second method, whereby we are now summarizing the message conversation. So, for example, in this, we're using the summarized prompt, not the system prompt, and then we're using the conversation text as now the message in which we're summarizing the entire chat with. And then the other difference is the max tokens here is 200, and like we had 4,000 in the other one. This is 200 because we're now summarizing it with fewer words, just a summary. And like the other one, we're now giving an explanation of something. So if I come here and create a new chat, probably if you haven't seen, my cat was running around here. It's called Dawn, but let's say I'm looking for a second name for my cat, right? So I'll ask what name can you give? So my cat is very white, a white cat. Very white, oh, it's actually here. So here is my cat, very white. And let's see if it gives me a response. Yeah, so it's given me a response for 3 tokens, and then the response is names such as Snowball, Dawn, Ivory, or Casper. I think Casper is because of the ghost, so I can actually have it named Dawn, Casper, and then a final name. I don't know. And then it's now giving me a summary of the chat, which is now the white cat names. And so this is now adding the OpenAI client. We've been able to add it and have it implemented. So the other thing is probably checking and seeing if, let's say, for example, our application, has it been able, our responses and everything, have we been able to save it to Azure Cosmos DB? So I'll come to Azure Cosmos DB and check the Explorer and see, is our data actually saved in the database? Because as you can see, we've been able to create a new chat, we can be able to delete it, we can be able to update and so on. But is it updating in our database? So I'll give it a second to load. Welcome to Azure Cosmos DB. And then this is our chat database, and we have the chat container, and we can see the items here. We have nothing. We have no data loaded on the items. So I think Julia is supposed to show us how we can be able to add this.
Yeah, absolutely. So just following along what you've shared, and I think so far you have only implemented the Azure OpenAI service. So we are yet to implement the Cosmos DB service, and that is why even if you're getting responses from the model, this was not being saved in a database. So that's kind of what we're going to do. So I've just shared my screen. Let's give it a minute to see if you'll actually see this. Bethany, perhaps you can confirm as soon as you're able to see it. All good? Right. So I was just following along in what Bethany was doing. So right now, my current code version has already implemented the OpenAI service. So I'm able to make this prompt. I'm able to send this request to the model. But as you can see, we are yet to implement the Cosmos DB service. Of course, my code has some errors. Pardon me for that, but let's see how we are going to kind of fix that. So the first thing, we saw Bethany kind of get the right package to execute the OpenAI service. So we're going to do exactly that. So in our case, we're going to need to get our Azure Cosmos package that will be required for us to basically access this library and use it in our solution. So we'll have it, we'll definitely add that. We'll use the .NET add package command, and we'll see that added as a reference on our file. Then the next thing I'm going to do is on my service, the Cosmos DB service, I'm then going to add the using directive so that we can now use this library into our application. And so I'm just going to add these two because we're going to use Azure Cosmos and Azure Cosmos Fluent. We're going to use the Fluent API in our code. And as you can see that my code is now clean. So let's just run a quick build. See if it's happy with what we have given so far. Hopefully this will build successfully. And again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please drop them on the chat, and we have an awesome team on standby to help answer that. So our build succeeded. And again, I think I've already pre-added the code that we would need to implement this service. Since we are a bit tight on time, we'll just spend some time going through what this code does. So first things first, we have our class, the Cosmos DB service, which is what we are implementing. And we are first declaring our container here, which is a read-only private variable. Then we get into our constructor, and as you can see, it takes in a bunch of parameters. And then first things first, we want to tell our application to basically make some noise or complain if it doesn't get any values in the database name, container name, endpoint, and key variables. So as long as any of these variables are null, it's definitely going to throw an exception. And then next thing, what we are doing is that we are creating the options. So basically, we are setting a policy for our naming, for our property naming, and we're trying to just adhere with the .NET property naming standard. So in this case, we're just setting that as camel case, so that during serialization, if you're getting any format conversions, we are going to definitely stick to this property naming convention. And then we're going to create a new Cosmos client. So we are definitely using Cosmos client, and we are doing this using our endpoints and keys. That way we'll be able to connect to our resource that we already provisioned on our Azure account. Then after that, we are going to simply make a reference to our database and our container. We have these resources ready on Azure, so we're basically making a reference to them. And we are simply using here the nullish coalescing operator to check if our container has a value. If it is not null, then store that value in the container variable that we declared at the very top. But if that's not the case, then please do make some noise. So that's basically the code that goes into our constructor. So let's now see what we have. This code is a bit lengthy, but that shouldn't worry you. We'll try and cover exactly what these different methods do. As you can see, I have about 6 or 7 different methods. And for us to properly understand what this kind of does, I'm just going to open our application. So this is how the app works. And as you can see, being a chat application, we definitely need a method that is going to add the messages, the individual messages that we type into this app into our database. So first things first, we are going to use an insert message async method. So basically, this is what that method is doing. It's going to first create a partition key because we need to logically divide our data in our database, simply because we have data in two different formats. We have our sessions, we have our messages. So we're going to create a partition key and we're going to use the message session ID for that. We're then creating a new message and we are creating it with a timestamp. So you can see that we are definitely storing the timestamp here. And then we're using the create item and async method to insert this new item into our container. So that's basically what this first method is doing. Then the second method is, remember, as you're typing these messages, we will store the individual messages as well as the different sessions. So treat this as the first session, and then you can have a different session. And so we need to have a separate method that kind of inserts these different sessions that we have. And that is this first method that we have here, which will do, it's a lot similar to this previous method, but in this case, instead of inserting a message, it's basically inserting a session into our database, right? So the other method that we can have a look at is the get sessions async method. So looking at our application on the left navigation bar, you do see that we are getting a list of our sessions. So we need to retrieve this from our database. And that's basically what this method is doing, get sessions async. We'll see we are running an SQL query and we are getting all the distinct records from our database, which are of type session. So we are doing that to retrieve that data, and then we're going to iterate through that response, and we're going to store the responses in a list called output. Now, we are then implementing a while loop here so that if you add any new sessions, so if I'm using the application and then I create a new session, it's going to iterate through this. And if it gets more responses or more results, it's definitely going to use the read next async method to find these newly added sessions and add them into our output list. And that's basically what this third method does. And then for this fourth method, we are getting the session messages. We're getting the session messages. So this is expected to be a lot similar to what we have just gone through. But in this case, instead of getting the different sessions, so instead of retrieving the list of sessions, it's now retrieving the list of messages that are in each respective session. So let's just have a quick walkthrough of how that method looks like. Yep, I think this is it. So we are definitely running our SQL command here where we are selecting all, and we're actually passing in the session ID to get the session that we want to get the individual messages from. We're then going to iterate through the responses. We're going to store that in our output, and then we're going to definitely add any new message results that we have into our list. That's basically what this method kind of works on. Then we have the update sessions async, and as the name kind of implies, we use this method to now update the sessions. As you can see on our application, we have this little edit button. So that's basically the method that is responsible for updating the item that is being selected. So we are creating a partition key using the session ID. And then we're going to use the replace item async method, a container method, to kind of update the session that we are working with. Then lastly, we have the upsert session batch async method. And this one kind of does two things. So it's, as you can see, we have an if statement here. So it's simply checking if the individual messages have the same partition key. So remember that a message can only have, a partition key that is similar to the session ID if it belongs to that session. So in this case, it's going to quickly check if that's the case. And if If that is not the case, it's going to simply complain. And if that's the case, we are creating a new partition key, and we're going to use the session ID of the first item in our messages. And then we're going to create a transactional batch here. So we can see we're using the create transactional batch method using the partition key. And then we're kind of looping through our messages. And if our message is actually, if we have that message existing, we're going to update it. And if the message is not existing, we're going to insert it. So that's basically what upsert kind of means. It's going to do both update and insert based on the conditions that you define in your code. And then lastly, which I think requires the least explanation, is the method that is responsible to delete the sessions and the messages that we have in our application. So you can see you can easily just delete any session or any message. And so this is basically the method that kind of takes care of that. So it's going to run a query, it's going to get the session using the session ID, and then it's basically going to delete the item that has been specified. Now, I know we're running short of time, but that's a quick walkthrough of what this code does. And all this is provided on the what do you call, on the Learn module. So I think at this point, we can try running our application, see, and just confirm if we are able to successfully store our messages into our application, into our database. So let's give it a quick second, see if we'll get it running. Right, so it's taking some time. All right, we can see it's now opening the preview. Let me just get some more working space. And yeah, so we have, let me just minimize this to give us more room. So we can try creating a new chat. So if I quickly just have a look at my Cosmos DB account, if I can just open this just to validate that we don't have any data yet, I'm just going to quickly do that. I'll go to my data explorer. So it's connecting to Azure Cosmos DB. And then we have our container here. We have our items. Let me get more working room. Oh, so you can see we have one item. So I think that's just what I've just done on the app when I've just created the new chat. So you can see that has already been recorded. And if we were to type in a question, so let me try asking it to tell me a joke about a robot. Let's see what it's going to say. So, okay, here's a joke. Why did the robot go on a diet? Because he had too many megabytes. All right, that's pretty cool, right? So
yeah,
if I think that's an interesting one. So if I were to go back to my database and refresh, I expect to see to see this. So you can see that now we've successfully implemented our Cosmos DB service, and we are able to add we're able to insert our data into our database. Now, if you can just have a look at this this JSON, you'll see that we are saving the ID. So this is basically what we covered in the models, in the classes that we defined. We have the type. So in this case, this is a message. So this is a message that I sent to the app. So in this case, I am also the user. But again, it also saves the message that I get back from the app. And in this case, the sender is the assistant. So basically, Bethany, I hope I answered your question in terms of how we can now implement the Cosmos DB service. And at this point, I believe that our application has the two services implemented, and you can simply get your real-time responses from the model and save your responses in your database, right?
Yeah, I think we've covered it. We've covered being able to get your messages there, have AI be able to reply to the prompts, and then having the session stored, updated, created, queried, and so on. It's amazing.
Great. Awesome, awesome. So let's see what.
But I think I'll caution us to ensure, because both services we're using are built, so I'll caution us to clean up our resources. So the first one we're cleaning up is the GitHub code spaces. This is so simple. You just go to github.com/code spaces, and take a look at your code spaces and decide, do I need to delete them? Do I need to keep them? Do I need to stop them? And do I need to change and have a bigger one? And then the other one is the Azure services. For this, I'm a visual person, but I also like simple things. So for this, I just use one command on my CLI to be able to delete everything, whereby, of course, I'll have to define the resource group and then use AZ group delete and then the resource group name, and everything will be deleted with just one click. And I'm not sure if we have time for just one question, right?
Yes,
we can
yes,
just leave them as homework, or I don't know, probably just one
Yeah, I
question.
think we have to. Yeah, we can have 2 minutes just to at least interact with our live viewers. So yeah, we do have one question for you. I know you've been asking a few on the chat, but we do have one for you. And you can visit this link to submit your vote. We definitely want to see what your responses are to this question. And the question is, after importing the Azure AI Open AI library and the namespace, which class is used to connect to an Azure OpenAI endpoint and model deployment? Let me repeat that. After importing the Azure AI OpenAI library and namespace, which class is used to connect to an Azure OpenAI endpoint and the model deployment? So is it A, the OpenAI client? Is it B, the completions? Or is it C, the chat message? So let's see. Bethany, do you see any responses coming in?
1 second. Ooh, it's loading.
Yeah. I see a few votes.
Yeah, you see what? Oh, yeah, I'm also seeing majority are voting. There's a lot of votes, almost 80% voting A. Then we have B and C, we have around 10% each. So let's see. Let's give them a second.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Let's see more what's coming in.
Do you think this is a tough question based on what we've covered today?
Based on what I've covered, I think I've covered each class today, each type. And yeah, I think I've covered each. And I'm pretty sure it's a bit simpler, but I don't know. Probably, do you remember the classes I covered? Do you remember what each stand for? For example, the chat message class? The type, was it a class or a type? Right?
Yeah, I remember you creating this. And sorry to cut you short. I see our time is really running out, but I see a good number of the viewers have actually submitted their votes. And yes, 87% of them have voted A. So Bethany, which is the correct answer?
Yeah, the correct answer is the OpenAI client. This is a class whereby we now connect it to our Azure OpenAI endpoint. Yeah. And I think we need to summarize what we covered today and go into like big overview. Just we did this, and I hope you're able to also do that at home.
Yeah, so definitely the learning doesn't need to stop here. A quick summary of what we've done: we created our Azure resources, we deployed them using a bicep template. We then had a quick walkthrough of the sample or starter code that was in a GitHub code space. And then we simply implemented our Azure OpenAI and Azure Cosmos DB services to connect to the two services and have our application easily give us responses from the model. Now, I know the learning doesn't stop there. We have tons of resources. You can easily do this project on your own. Please do that and share with us, how your experience is and give us feedback. But yeah, I think with that, I'll hand it back to Beth to see if we have anything remaining before we wind up.
Yeah, as well as share with us any issues you have on GitHub with the starter template. Remember, we are using the start branch, not the main branch, to be able to implement this. Again, all the resources, you can find them using the link that will be pasted on the chat or the QR code. This will give you all the resources you need to continue learning about Blazor, .NET, Azure CLI, learning about Azure OpenAI, and so on and so forth. And remember, we're still doing Ignite, so there's still a lot of things for you to catch up on. But one major thing, if you're interested in large language models and Azure OpenAI, and you want to continue proceeding building with it, I recommend you check out our generative AI for beginners curriculum, which was launched on 31st October. And in this curriculum, we cover everything you need to know about large language models and help you get started building different applications, not just chat. You can even build applications for images, chat completions, and so on and so forth. And with that, I think it's time to say goodbye.
All right, this has been awesome. This has been real. Thank you so much, Beth, and do enjoy the rest of Ignite, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and have
Bye.
a good rest of your day.